Hi, my name is Dawn Wages. I am the chair / president of the board. Previously, I was the treasurer of the board, and I started my service on the Python Software Foundation board in 2022.
Hi, my name is Tanya Allard. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the current PSF board directors. I also am a PSF fellow and part of the PyLadies Global Council. On my day-to-day job, I am the director of Quanset Labs, which is an open source company where we try and build and sustain open source projects and communities. I've also been serving as a director for the PSF since 2021, so that means my term is coming to an end this June 2024.
Hi, I'm Jeff Triplett. I'm a Django developer here in Lawrence, Kansas. I was on the Python Software Foundation board from 2018 to 2023. I served as treasurer and vice chair of the foundation.
My name is Marlene Mangami. I currently work at Microsoft and I work as a developer advocate for them. My focus is on Python and artificial intelligence. I was involved as a director from 2017 to 2022.
Hi, my name is Naomi Cedar. I'm currently partly retired. I am the author of the Quick Python book, working on the 4th edition. I'm editor of some other Python books that are in progress. I was on the board from 2015 to 2020. The first 2 years of that, I was a vice chair, and the last 3 years, I was chair of the board.
Hi, I'm Jackie Kazel. I was on the board from 2016 to 2020. I'm currently a director of technology solutions at a small startup in McLean, Virginia.
Hi, my name's Deb Nicholson. I'm the executive director at the Python Software Foundation. We're the nonprofit home of the Python programming language, and I'm coming here to talk to you today about our board election.
What is the PSF board?
The PSF board is composed of folks that help us set the direction of the nonprofit organization. So they look at big picture stuff like where we're headed, where we want to be in the next 5 years. And I would say they also act sort of as an ambassador between the PSF and a lot of the local communities that each of our board members are involved with. So they help us by bringing in both ideas, things that they're excited about, or sometimes concerns or things that we could do better on.
How do you view the role as a board member?
So I think the role of a board member is really to help with oversight of the PSF as an organization, as a nonprofit. And it's important, I would say, to understand what the mission of the PSF is, which they want to support the Python community. They want to make sure that it's as diverse and inclusive as possible, and also just ensuring that the Python language is being used and grown across the world. And so for me, I think part of being a board member is helping to the nonprofit, helping to support the staff that are there, and also helping to sort of make decisions about things that are happening within the community. I would say that's the core role of a board member.
We also have a lot of fiduciary and duty of care responsibilities. That means we also have to ensure that the PSF funds and the budget that they have year to year is being used appropriately. So we also approve some budget, for example, for when PyCon is being organized, we have to ensure that the budget is aligned with what we can actually spend, and we have a good prediction of where we're going to end up after PyCon, also increasing budget or adjusting budgets, for example, for working groups, like we recently did for the Code of Conduct one, so that they can offer Code of Conduct training for community members and conference organizers. So we basically are operating at a very strategical level so that the PSF continues to be here in 5-10 years and is also prepared to continue to serve the community and their mission throughout those years.
Having served on the board and having been chair, I think there are a number of things that are part of what being on the PSF board is. For me, the most important part of that is that it is a position serving the community. And that's I think, important to keep in mind, that the reason that you would become a director is to help the community to have a role, I guess, in a way, some responsibility for the direction of the PSF and the Python community. And it's really important, I think, not just the steering council takes care of what happens with the code, but the Python community is so much more than just the code behind Python. And we need to have good people that are willing to put in some time for that. The more that you're willing to do that from a position that is selfless and based on service, the better, I think, the outcome for everyone is in the long run. So I think that's kind of important. I think some people have kind of misconceptions about what being on the board is. It's not really doing any of the day-to-day stuff. The Python Software Foundation has lots of staff who are very good at what they do. We pay them to do that. They're the ones that do the stuff from day to day. What's important for a board member is to more worry about the future directions of where we're going as a community. And, going along with that, then how do we get there? How do we actually find the funding? How do we actually make sure we have the right people doing the right things? How do we actually make sure that the things that our staff are told to do are the right things for the future? So all of that's what a board member does. And in a way, that's kind of the interesting, maybe the exciting thing about being a board member is that you're one of the few people then that gets to see the whole picture of what's going on with the Python community. You have that visibility that not very many people have.
What is it like during the board meeting?
So I was on the board from 2016 to 2020, and certainly the meetings might have changed, but during that time, often it was a virtual meeting, remote for a couple of hours, and then we started to meet twice a year, once in person at PyCon, and then once at another location somewhere around the world. Meetings were, they were pretty long at times, but we got through a lot of content, and especially the ones that were on site, they were really about sort of advancing and evaluating the way the Python Software Foundation was operating.
The board meetings would really just there would be an agenda that was sent to us, and we would discuss the agenda items. There was some time for discussion, some time to go through housekeeping items, some updates as well, sometimes from the staff, and then a period where we would vote. And oftentimes we would discuss a topic or an issue before we would actually make a vote.
So the board meetings by our rules are every other month, but we have tons to talk about, so much to do. We meet every month for about an hour and a half. We all log on to a Zoom call. In many of our meetings, we will have the PSF staff on the calls as well, because a lot of the things that we are working on involve the staff. Sometimes we will get insight from the staff on our decisions and our discussions, and a lot of our votes will affect the work that the staff will be doing because it informs the strategy of the Python Software Foundation. So that's a really important part that not everyone knows, is the staff is on many of our calls. And then some of the calls where we do have things that need to be discussed without staff being around because of just being privacy, because we do have privacy responsibilities and commitments as a board member, we will have staff removed from the call. And they know that, and they prefer that as well for respect purposes. Deb, the executive director of the Python Software Foundation, also serves on the board. It is informal that Deb serves as the secretary, but it is important that Deb is one of the members of the board of directors, and she's able to vote in all of our decisions as well, while the staff does not have that ability. As we go through the meeting for an hour and a half, we loosely use Robert's Rules of Order, and it is really just to help engage in healthy discussion. We don't stick to Robert's Rules of Order to the T, and it's not required in any of our bylaws to use that procedure in order to discuss any of our upcoming votes, our old business or new business. And that's an important sticking point too. It is not in our bylaws that we need to use Robert's Rules of Orders, but it does help with our discussion. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Robert's Rules of Order, we use the abbreviated RRO, Robert's Rules of Order book, to help kind of with discussions. But it's not necessary, and we help you as soon as you join the board, and you're always welcome to ask questions from other board members in the meeting, before the meeting, after the meeting, on how things go, because we're always comfortable sharing topics, and this is a new role for most of us, so it's us all kind of learning together.
How much time did you spend serving as a board member?
Serving on the board of directors is anywhere from 2 hours to 10 hours a month. It depends on how many work groups you want to be a part of. In general, we recommend that directors not be on more than 2, maybe 3 maximum work groups. You will be more effective the fewer work groups that you're in. Each of those work groups tend to be anywhere from an hour to 2 hours a month. That could be virtual meetings, keeping up with email. That could be other types of meetings or meeting prep. Being on the board of directors, I would say, is at least for the general meetings or 2 to 3 hours a month, mostly because you're going to meet for 60 to 90 minutes together with everybody. You're going to have weekly emails that you need to keep up on. You may have Slack conversations. You will need to do a little bit of prep of the agenda so that you know what you're talking about. Sometimes there are email threads that you need to be up to date on so that when you get to the meetings that you're prepared. So, I would say 2 to 10 hours is the least that you should spend a month to be on the board.
As a board member, you can choose how much time you also want to invest into being a board member or into serving the community as well. So board members are encouraged, I would say, to interact with the community, whether that's giving talks or things like that. And so there was a bit of flexibility with that. And it also depends on whether you are sort of in the executive committee, which is the chair or vice chair. That can mean the amount of time you invest is a little bit higher.
What are your rights and abilities as a board member?
As a board member, we have a number of rights, which is like being formed for us. This all comes very, very tightly together with us ensuring the mission of the PSF is fulfilled. So we have access to financial records, like some other reports from the working group, so that we can oversee those and ensure that they are fulfilling also their missions and goals. We also are able to advocate on behalf of our community and propose new initiatives, or, as I said, like amend some of our initiatives so that they better serve the community. I think a lot of the work that we do is at a very strategic level. So we really shift from being operating as a tactical level or being those like doing every single thing or every little task or step, but it's more about how we can empower community members, community leaders, volunteers to do more, and how we can ensure that they are supported to do whatever they need to do to support their communities and their user group.
As the board member, you pretty much see everything. So that's very interesting, but that also means that there becomes a lot of stuff that you have to keep your mouth shut about. Even when it is so tempting, you cannot say about certain things. So yeah, it can be very, very harmful if anybody on the board sort of expresses opinions that, well, I guess it's a fine line. If somebody asks you, I thought this decision was really stupid, what do you think? And you in fact did not support it, but the rest of the board did, what do you say? Well, you do not want to betray, you certainly do not want to betray the confidence that's sort of in the board meeting. People go to board meetings, there's a lot of discussion. What comes out in the minutes is public. The rest of it is understood, or should be understood, to be private and confidential. So you don't want to go telling tales about what other people said in the meeting, to say, we discussed it in the board and I did not agree, but this is our final decision, so that's what we're going to do, is about as far as you can go in that situation. I mean, it's kind of hard in some cases, but I mean, you can certainly acknowledge that, well, there's this and that problem, as you say, yes, we saw that, but we decided this other thing. Yeah, but I mean, it's really kind of tricky, and it's one of the things that board members, I think, sometimes struggle with.
What are the internal dynamics of the board like?
So the board is composed of 12 people, including myself as the executive director. And we work towards trying to decide things by loose consensus. We try not to have the whole board split. Obviously, we're all coming from different places, so sometimes we don't agree with each other at first, but we do try to see each other's point of view and come to a solution that makes sense for the whole community. So it's really important to have a lot of different voices and make sure that we're looking at things from every angle.
What type of information flow does the board receive in general?
The board gets information sometimes from staff, sometimes from work groups, and sometimes things, ideas, or opportunities, or even threats come from outside the organization that we have to consider together. So the way that we try to organize that is to give people a heads up on what's going to be discussed at each month's meeting. So you look at the agenda in advance. We do our best to make sure that you have background on each topic before you get to the place where you're going to vote on it. Occasionally that's a little bit trickier because something comes up pretty short notice, but if the whole board feels that they're not ready to vote on something because it's too short notice, then we take a pass on it and boot it down the road.
What is the difference between a normal board member and a chair?
So the difference between a board member and a chair is new to me as well. My first experience with how the chair position worked in the Python Software Foundation was seeing Thomas Wooters handle the position before me. I've also asked previous chairs how it went for them in preparation for this role. The way that I see my chief responsibility as chair of the board is to encourage consensus and a healthy conversation and dialogue among all the board members. We're really a board that values being able to have discussion and then come to an agreement on it. It means that we are expressing our points of views well and being able to make convincing arguments to be able to bring other people onto our own side on how to accomplish it. One of the cool things though about our board is that most of the time, many times, we all really want the same end mission. We want the health and safety of our community and the health and safety of the Python language. So in those points, we don't have many disagreements. It's always about how to get those things done. And so I really appreciate the value of the chair and recognizing and underscoring that you are leading discussions in each meeting. You are asking people to clarify. You are repeating certain points that people are mentioning for points of for clarity, and then giving people the opportunity to respond in an orderly way. And then you're also maybe asking people who may not feel comfortable speaking if there are more points that they'd like to raise. Sometimes I will talk to board members after meetings and talk to them about how they're feeling on the board, if there's anything that they'd like to change in order to feel more comfortable speaking. And also because we are a board with that a lot of people with different first languages, we should make sure to have board discussions in a way that's conducive for everyone to contribute. So sometimes that means putting out board minutes well in advance so people have time to review, writing extra context down in the Slack channel that we use so we can have people use, and then also keeping track of the Slack channel. So if people don't want to say it verbally but want to write it in the Slack channel, which is also part of our recording purposes for minutes, they can also do that. So it's a bunch of different things. It's all based off of the person who is the chair and how they decide to be chair, but it's about consensus and collaboration and communication. We added an extra C there for voting on the board.
The chair of the board should really be the partner of the executive director in kind of guiding the organization. There are a number of ways that this kind of works. I mean, in one way, basically, it doesn't work for somebody to have, say, 11 bosses or something like that. That's usually a recipe for disaster. So, the board chair is usually the position that kind of directly interacts with the executive director in that sort of sense of representing the board and, this is what we think should be done, etc., so that there's basically just one channel of communication there. And so that's really important. The other thing that the board chair does is, at least in my view, is sets the agenda and sort of the expectations and guides the way that the board functions. So if you basically have 11 people turn up and nobody has planned what should happen from a meeting, that's pretty much a guarantee nothing much will happen from a meeting. So it is the board chair's kind of position working with the executive director. Again, those two should really be in cooperation the whole time to sort of say, okay, this meeting we need to discuss this and this and this, and these are the issues that we need the board to resolve. So it's all of those things. So that means that as board chair, you spend quite a bit more time. I think the other thing I always viewed it at least is that it was not just that you were sort of the executive director's boss, but you were the executive director's partner and main supporter. So I always viewed it as my job as board chair was to make sure that the executive director had the support to do what they needed to do. And sometimes that meant working with the actual executive director. Sometimes it meant basically running interference and making sure that board members didn't give in to the temptation to interfere or sort of go around channels or things like that, which sometimes a delicate job, but that's also important. It's to try and help make sure that everything functions that way, as well as to kind of be, like I say, the leader in terms of helping to set the directions and the discussions of the board.
Are there any cultural considerations that one need to know?
One of the most important things, or I would say cultural things, that you have to be aware of when you think about joining the PSF board is first remember that the PSF is a US registered non-profit organization, so it is a 501c3. A lot of the processes that we have to fulfill as a non-profit, as a board, and a lot of how things are done, like what we're allowed to do, for example, budgetary wise and not, or employment or not, are dictated by US laws and sometimes the local US laws. So if you're from another country than the US, there are a lot of these rules and policies that are foreign, just because they are very, very US centric. So the first few months are going to be quite confusing while you wrap your head around. If you've never served in a US nonprofit before, there is just so much information and there are so many nuances to it that basically the first few months, it's really you settling in, familiarizing yourself with these processes, understanding what is possible to do as a nonprofit or not. I would say that is one of the biggest cultural differences or shocks or learnings that you're going to take away. And even as you continue to serve as a board member, you might encounter new instances or new processes down the road. They say like, oh, this operates very differently to, for example, my home country or the country where I'm resident in. So that's also why we have a very knowledgeable executive director, staff. We have like some lawyers also that work with us because they need to bring all of that procedural and legal context that sometimes we lack as international board directors.
So I will say one of the hardest things I think we had to deal with on the board culturally among board members was time zones, and scheduling. It's hard to make the decision to say that a certain time will accommodate the majority of people, but will always be in the middle of the night for somebody else. And to ask yourself, is that fair? Or when does everybody else get up in the middle of the night to have a meeting so that one person isn't always the person who's getting up in the middle of the night? Time zones are hard. And it's not just time zones, but it's also time zones compounded with family considerations or other demands in life.
Something that surprised me when I joined the board was I had, at the time, I had spent some time in school in the US or in other parts, but not extended periods of time. And I would say extended period of time, maybe having discussions and sometimes challenging discussions. And I really learned a lot about sort of intercultural communication and different styles of communication. And that was challenging for me at times, but also was really a learning process and a growing process for me. So I enjoyed that. I would say if you are someone, particularly if you're coming from Africa, for example, you want to really be aware that sometimes people from other contexts communicate in a different way or value certain things over others, and that's okay. And that you should be able to advocate for your specific group and your community. And I think that's what you want to bring to the board, is you want to bring your cultural perspective and represent where you're coming from.
Yeah, when you serve on the board of directors, I think you do need to consider several cultural considerations. One, I'm from North America, and I think that people from North America and Europe tend to talk a lot. I think we're loud. We don't wait to jump into conversations, and I think you need to be aware of that. I think you also have to look to see other directors who maybe have not had a voice. And it's good to encourage other directors to speak. And if you notice that directors are falling out of the fold, maybe they're not, exerting themselves, maybe they need a little bit of help, whether that's discussing it with them, whether that's like finding out which topics that they want to talk about. My general advice to other directors is if you find yourself speaking more than 2 or 3 times in a meeting, unless you're the chair, you should pause and let other people talk first and see if that doesn't encourage other people to speak as well.
What are the traits of a good board member?
Traits of a great board member, the ones that I see and admire are people who recognize that we all have the same mission. So we want the health and safety of the Python Software Foundation and the Python language and the Python community. But we just have differences on how we think we should get there. So really going back to our main goals and keeping those really present as we make our cases on how to get to our end destination, which is improving our language and our community. So those board members also have a skill in conveying their ideas and their discussion points. And then how we get there really focuses on who's going to need to be involved, what do those timelines look like on getting involved, and like suggesting some of these collaborative options, pulling in some of the experts to know, asking the community what they think, and knowing that all of the answers don't always live in our head. And I really enjoy those collaborative discussions from those board members.
I think one of the traits of being a good director is to listen and to represent your community. That's not only listening while you're in meetings, it's also listening to community members. If you see issues in your community, that maybe reaching out to them and letting them know that you have an ear and they can come to you. Some of that could be going on podcasts, that could be going to meetups, that could be helping your community and showing that the PSF cares because you want to have a presence there.
For you to be able to perform your duties as a board member, you have to always keep that goal in mind, and that is serving the community, empowering the community. That also means being aware of your biases, being aware of your privileges, and some awareness gaps that you might have, because our community is so vast and so diverse that I alone, or some of us alone, do not have enough context about how our global community operates and like where within a system they operate. So I think also that ability to be humble and recognizing when you don't know something or don't have enough information, but knowing that you can ask others, whether it is within the board or your community or elsewhere, for help and advice, is also a very good trait to have as a board of directors.
And you don't always have to know that during the board. So if any of that intimidates you on being a good board member, it's all learned. None of us come with it. I know that I didn't come with it from the very first day. But one of the skill sets that I do have is being able to ask questions without feeling embarrassed about asking the questions, because no one expects you to have all the answers from the beginning. Another thing board members are really good at is being able to determine the amount of time that they have that they can devote to this cause, to these initiatives, and when they're able to say no. And one of the tough things that I have to navigate myself just with volunteering is that I am not really good at saying no. I want to sign up for everything. I want to do all of the things. If it's important, I want to be part of it. But there are so many initiatives on the board level that you can get involved with, and it's important to, you can switch and you can pick different things. You can move around as much as you'd like, but when you can pick things and then continue them and nudge them forward and pick your specialty, that's really where you see a lot of the progress and gain made. And you can also get a lot of pride from being able to pick a specific initiative and continue to drive it forward.
What does one need to know or learn to be a good candidate?
I think this is a great start, watching a video like this or watching previous videos that were done in the past discussing the PSF, learning about the community more, reading about how US nonprofits function. Those are all great ways to improve your chances of being a good candidate.
If you're talking about this strictly from a candidate perspective, a lot of what I've seen are people who are active and passionate in the community. There are certain skills that the board probably needs to have, but I'm not sure that with the current voting structure, we recognize that. An example would be a legal asset, such as an attorney, would be a great asset to have. Somebody who is, an accountant for a company for a fiduciary responsibility is a good asset. But what often we reward in the community from election perspective are people who are active and passionate about growing the community and doing various things, whether it be open source contributions, running a conference or trainings, but basically pushing and growing the community and advancing the community usually are folks who are ones who are elected to the board. And I said that explicitly because I don't think we elect people, we look for people we know. If the membership is all folks from North America and Europe, so then you have people who are from North America and Europe most likely to get elected. But not only that, it's not just popularity, but even when you go into I've done XX, blah, 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 I've done all these things into the candidate pitch. If somebody put, I've worked 10 years in finance and I've helped organize a couple of meetups, they might be weaker on the Python side, but they see it. They see the promise. Or even somebody who's an engineer in the financial world. We had a previous board member, Van, who is an attorney, and he was on the board for quite a few years, and the board greatly benefited from it. I think these dedicated skills are very important. It's more about the little things. You don't need somebody who's a complete lawyer. You don't need somebody who's a complete finance, but it's sort of putting on that hat. And there are trainings for this as well. And learning to think and ask the questions that should be asked to say, will this get us sued? Is this a financially responsible action? What is the risk that we're taking on from a financial perspective? What is our risk profile from an organization with respect to how and where we store our money in the interim before we spend it? So just looking at those little things and knowing to say, oh, this is beyond us. Let's bring in somebody from the outside who can then supplement our skills. And we recognize that this is an important thing.
Sometimes maybe people are sort of run for the board, get elected, and then they are surprised to understand that they don't know enough to be effective right away. They need to learn things. I mean, it's probably true. And it was one of the reasons that we went to longer board terms, the 3-year term, because it used to be just 1 year, but we found one problem was that it probably takes around 6 months to learn enough so that you can start to feel confident about contributing, okay? It's not that you can't vote, it's whatever, but it's there are so many things that you don't even begin to feel comfortable at first. You can't go in, it's very rare that you can go in and be a really effective board member in the first few months because you're just still learning how everything works. So, that includes some of the main things you need to be aware of as a member of a nonprofit board for an organization that's based in the US. Yeah, there are various complications there. One of the technical terms is that being a board member carries a fiduciary responsibility. And what does that mean? That means that when you become a board member, you undertake to make decisions based on the benefit of the organization and not on your own benefit. That's the simple way of explaining fiduciary responsibility. So, there are just a lot of things like that, down to how does this individual board want to do things? How do people work? That's also needs to be learned. But being on the board is a great thing, and it's important. You decide a lot of important stuff, but you're not going to suddenly go in and single-handedly change the world on a board. That's not what boards are for.
What are the challenges you face after becoming a board director?
Well, some of the challenges that you're going to encounter when you join the board, I already covered some of those as part of the PSF being a US-based nonprofit. Like, a lot of these processes are more than likely going to be very new. There is a lot of information. Like, sometimes it feels like the onboarding time is very fast, but also very prolonged in the sense that you're continuously learning, and it takes you a really good amount of meetings or sessions or voting sessions to actually get the hang of it. I think also another big challenge, and this is more on a personal level, is that once you are a board director, the whole Python community has very high expectations of what you're going to do as a member. So sometimes, as with any other jobs or any other roles or any other volunteer roles, sometimes we are very able to live up to those expectations. Sometimes there are things that get on our way, whether it is lack of processes, or we just have way too many things, or priorities shift because the world shifts and whatnot. And it can be sometimes quite disheartening, like also you setting a lot of expectations for yourself and knowing that you want to change a lot of things and you want to do good, and sometimes not being able to do that. Like, that is sometimes something that I've seen. Like, we all care. Like, we are all in the board because we care and we want to do good. But like, sometimes having all of those expectations can be quite hard, quite tough on ourselves.
I also found that sometimes the discussions could be a bit challenging, especially if we're talking about a controversial issue or something like that. I think just having having emotional energy to be able to participate in those discussions. You do need some level of interest in what's going on in the community to feel motivated to have those discussions.
So I have heard that sometimes you get a little more email from your local community asking whenever something happens at the PSF, like we post a blog post or we announce dates for something, you kind of become the representative in your local community. So you might get a bunch of email like, what does that mean? Should I apply for that? Like, does it apply to us? Like, and those kinds of things. So I think your local community may ask you to kind of like add extra commentary or color to things that are going on at the PSF and how it affects your local community. The other thing is, like, you'll get more email from us at the PSF because we want to make sure that you're informed on all the topics that you're thinking about and considering as a board member. So you will sign up for the PSF Slack. There will be a couple of channels. You might sign up for a work group that is in addition to the board work because you want to pursue something. So there is a bit of a time commitment. There is some more email. And I do think there's a little bit of an expectation from your community to represent what your community's needs are.
Does it hinder your other commitments with the community and your private life?
I don't find that it hindered any of my other commitments with communities or private life. It is an extra 10 hours a month that you have to figure out how to fit in with other stuff. Thankfully, my employer was very flexible and it was pretty easy for me to schedule around it. Not every job has that flexibility, so it's definitely something to talk to your employer about and figure out how you manage the time so that you're not like overstressed with work. If anything, I think it was a benefit to the community because being able to be a resource for the Django community has helped a lot, because people could go and ask me questions about should they apply for grants or just general things that kind of come up. Most of the time, it's just routing people to the right person at the PSF because people tend to not know who to contact sometimes, and that can be beneficial.
So today is my wife's birthday. Happy birthday to my wife. And I'm recording a video for the PSF. And I'm so glad that my wife loves and supports the work that I do, because she's fine with me hanging out with Georgie, who's just down the street. Hi, Georgie. It does get in the way sometimes, and that's kind of by design. You're volunteering things, so that's, you volunteer your time from somewhere, and usually it's your personal time. But it goes back to one of the things that I say frequently is that you need to learn how to say no and when to say no, and really allocate the amount of time that you have available while while still remaining flexible on when that time may show up, because you're on time zones with people across the world. You're working with dozens of people. So being able to understand when you can show up and how you can show up is really important. And it's very, very personal. No one can tell you when and how to show up. It's really for you to kind of decide for yourself. Another way that it does hinder some of my work personally or my relationships personally is how I do need to remain objective in disagreements in the community. Just like I mentioned frequently, is we all have the end goal of keeping the community safe and the language safe and progressing forward, but we all have different ideas on how to do it. And when there are disagreements in the community, especially when sometimes there are legal implications or safety concerns, I am not at liberty to always discuss those freely until we come to a particular resolution. And that's a really important goal as a bonded member. As a bonded member of the board, which means we have certain insurance and we also have certain responsibilities, I am responsible to making sure that the health and safety of the Python Software Foundation is part of the way that I navigate the world. So that's a little bit tough, but I have a great team. We have a great team of people who also have similar responsibilities, and we talk about those responsibilities together.
Certainly being a director is a commitment. I left in 2020 when my second kid showed up. And, it was 2020. I had a baby. There was COVID. There was no childcare. And at that moment, I recognized I needed to focus on my family. But I'm going to send him away now. Okay.
Mommy!
So yeah, being a director, you certainly are making a commitment in your own time. And we all make choices to do things or not do things. And you do this because you're passionate about it. And how to make that decision is different for each person. One could have no children or 10 children and have the same amount of stress, depending on the situation they're in, whether it's access to financial resources to help with childcare, or whether it is a village to help with childcare. And, it's about balancing life, but it is certainly a time commitment that you're choosing to do. And so in 2016, when I started, I had no children. 2017, I had my first. 2020, I had my second. And with the pandemic, that's when I said to myself, I needed to step away and not rerun for the board. I'll be back one day, though. I'll be back.
How did you benefit from being a board member?
The recognition of the PSF, it's such a great organization. So being associated with the PSF and knowing the community trusts someone is always good for one's career.
We sometimes have very difficult and lengthy discussions and conversations about some very hairy topics as well. So being able to learn from others, understand how others perceive certain issues, how others are impacted by certain issues or decisions in different corners of the world has also been very, very enlightening. Well, just my period as a board member, very enjoyable, because I've continuously been learning from them. I think we have an amazingly talented and generous and kind board, and being able to make these connections is probably one of the best things of being a board member.
For my career, I don't know that I could specifically point to anything that helped me career-wise directly, but the experience of doing that, where you get to be on the board of an international organization, you get to work with all of these other people that are on the board from various different backgrounds. You get to decide these things, you get to learn a lot, and quite probably get some knowledge and possibly develop some leadership skills and experience. All of that, it's personal growth that probably will also be career growth. But no one ever said to me, oh, you're on the PSF board, you get a promotion. No.
I think you should do it to serve your community. So if you're doing it to advance your career professionally, that probably happens, but that shouldn't be why you're serving on the board. It shouldn't be to advance a KPI. I'm here to serve the community. I want directors who are in it to serve the community. I like it when I see community organizers who are in it, because because that's a selfless job that people do to really help their communities.
One of the goals as well is to be able to support communities, Python communities from around the world. And I remember I was on the board when we decided to have PyCon Africa, and I was chairing at the time. And it was really nice to be able to feel the support from other board members who had also been involved in conference organizing or meetup organizing. And I also think in general, the PSF being able to support local communities, understanding what resources they need, providing those resources, also making sure that at PyCon, which is a larger event, that you are seeing people from all over the world there. And I think all of those things really benefited the African Python community, which is the specific community I would identify myself with.
If you're thinking of running for the board, nominations open on June 11th and close on June 25th. So you only have a couple days left to decide. Start declaring your intention, and then you have until the 25th to make your final decision.
Why should I vote?
You're voting on board members. Board members are making votes that are directly related to the way that you're engaging with the Python community.
We need to meet a minimum amount of votes of our total eligible voters so that an election is valid or is deemed valid. This ensures that we have at least a minimum representation of our membership that have elected the directors that are going to serve for the next term.
As an African person, I would love to see representation on the board from Africa, just because if the PSF is supposed to support the African community, it's great to have someone from that community living in Africa who has a good understanding of what resources are needed and has a good understanding as well of how the PSF can support that region. So I do think that as an African person, if you want your perspectives to be represented at the PSF level,
why do you need to vote? Because your voice matters. You can choose not to vote, but then your voice is not counted. So I know we are growing. The PSF, the Python community, has been growing across the world. And I think it's really important, especially for folks outside of the US and outside of Europe.
You need to vote to represent your community. Historically, we've had a lot of people out of North America and Europe voting people from those regions on. If you have a big community, even if you have a small community, getting people who are part of your region who you want to represent to vote is really valuable, and that helps diversify the PSF. And that's important because it's a huge world and we've been overrepresented in certain countries for a long time. And the more people that we can get makes Python better. It makes the community more inclusive, and that's just a win for all of tech.
So many active people that I have met in Latin America and throughout Southern Europe, or who are in Africa, or who are in Asia, that are doing work that means they are entitled to vote. You know, those blocks of voters can have a real influence on who is leading the Python Software Foundation. So it comes down to, do you want to have that influence? Well, you need to register, you need to vote. And certainly the PSF we have over the years continued to try to find ways to make that more possible. I think now with some of the membership levels now, as well as the contributing members and all of that, there are ways that people from around the world can vote. And that I think is very important. It's very frustrating to see somebody that you know would be a brilliant board member who happens to be from a part of the world where not many people are voting, and they lose that support. That is, I've seen that happen, and it is very, very disappointing. So yeah, that's why people need to vote.
The reason you want to vote is because you get to help us decide who should be in charge of helping set the vision of the PSF for the next couple of years. Board members serve for 3 years, and so they really get a long time to sort of get comfortable and get involved and really put their stamp on the organization. So voting helps you be part of that. The other thing, members this year will vote on a few bylaws changes, which help define the organization's relationship and sort of standing in the community and how we conduct ourselves. The election, the actual voting, takes place from July 2nd until July 16th, so mid-July. So you'll have about 2 weeks to decide who you want to cast your votes for. If you want to check your membership status, you can absolutely email us, and psf-donations@python.org is a good one, and psf-elections@python.org is also fine.
Vote for the board. Woo!